Joe talks about Joe. And now, your host, Joe Slepsky.
Hey, Joe on Joe listeners, it's me, Joe Slepsky, and I'm back and you're back. This is the quarantine re-releases of our original tracks going back 4 years, and I hope you're enjoying these as much as I'm enjoying reliving them, warts and all. I think you can easily hear where I'm finding myself and finding what the show turned out to be, so I'm really happy to share these with you guys. Again, we pulled these back from behind the Patreon wall, and I wanted to make them available to everybody during this time to share and give and listen and have fun, especially because G.I. Joe's back on YouTube now. So, yeah, so I appreciate that. And you guys can always follow me at Joe on Joe Pod on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. Let me know what you think of some of these early episodes, how terrible they are, or how funny they are, or how awful they are. And we're starting recording back up again, so reach out to me. Let me know, joeandjoepod@gmail.com. Let me know if you want to join me for an episode. I believe we're going to jump into G.I. Joe Extreme very, very soon. So without any further ado, here is the OG track from Joe on Joe 4 years ago. Enjoy.
You are listening to the Joe on Joe podcast, the only podcast where Joe talks about Joe. And now, your host, Joe Slepsky.
Yo, Joe, and welcome back to Joe on Joe, the only podcast where I, Joe Slepsky, breaks down the G.I. Joe original cartoon series, episode by episode. Thanks for listening. Remember to follow me on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Joe on Joe Pod, and you can send me an email at joeonjoepod@gmail.com. I am very excited this week because we have the very first episode of the ongoing Joe series. Now, once again, it is a mini-series. However, it is the start of the actual series. So this takes you back to September 1985. And the episode is called The Further Adventures of G.I. Joe, and it's part of the Pyramid of Darkness 5-part miniseries. This probably was the miniseries that I loved the best, that I saw the most when I was a kid. I was 10 years old, and it tickled every fancy that I had. So we're going to get into it, and remember, today's file card spotlight is on Breaker, the G.I. Joe communication expert. So here we go. I love that they call this The Further Adventures of G.I. Joe. I'm pretty sure I didn't know that before doing this actual episode, because it's almost like it's saying everything else is just going to be awesome. Just sit down, sit back, get ready, strap it on. We're going to enjoy some G.I. Joes. And real quick, before we get into the show, I need to make a couple corrections. Because every single time I'm editing an episode, I hear me say something, whether I'm identifying someone or talking about one of the machines or talking about one of the characters, and I'm wrong. I'm so totally wrong. But I don't go back and fix it because, you know what, let's live in the moment. So last week, I totally misidentified Heavy Metal, Driver of the Thunder. He was such a cool toy. I never had him as a kid, but I always loved the look of him because he had that cool green and brown color scheme. And he came with the monocular like telescope, and just a very cool looking character. He had the little wings coming up on the side of his head, and I think I called him Steeler or Clutch or something. I don't know what I called him, but I knew it was wrong when I said it, and I never went back and fixed it. And a couple episodes back, I called the Snow Battle Sled the Snowcat. It's totally not the Snowcat. Like, I know it wasn't Snowcat. I knew it was coming out of my mouth, but you know what? We're gonna live with some errors. The Further Adventures of G.I. Joe. So it's written by Ron Friedman. Ron Friedman also wrote the previous 2 miniseries as well. So we are going to be in for a kind of a similar plot where Cobra has a big picture scheme. It's going to affect the whole world. There's going to be things are going to be located all over the planet that the Joes have to split up and go take care of. However, by this point in time, this aired, by the way, on September 16th, 1985, for the first time. The Joes themselves, the toy line, had introduced a lot of new characters. So again, like in the previous miniseries, this first episode has a lot of introductions of the new characters. But with all those new toys and characters, you have the opportunity to explore a lot of different characterizations of people. So you have a lot more personalities bouncing off each other. This was the third wave of Joe toys. For me, that was the wave. That was my meat and potatoes. Like, I had almost all of the third wave figures. I think there was like one or two that I didn't get. So when they all start showing up in the TV show, they're more colorful. They're not everyone's not in the dress green stuff like that, like the first generation was. So it's like almost every character in the Joes are now have truly become their own little superhero. So we've got Shipwreck, a pirate, basically a Navy man. He's flying a Sky Striker, although Navies have jets. I'll give him that. And we've got a space shuttle taking off. Now, what's more 80s than a space shuttle? A space shuttle with a mohawk, maybe. And the space shuttle gets caught in a net that is set by Cobra. And you just meet the Crimson Twins, the Crimson Guard leader. Now, it's weird because the Crimson Guardsmen were in the previous miniseries, but Tomax and Xamot were not. Little known fact about Tomax and Xamot, they're supposed to be the Italian mafia. But they don't sound Italian in the least, not even in that bad stereotype way.
Wrong again, Chrome Cheeks.
Cobra
We've been
is
expecting you.
kind of kidnapping the space shuttle mid-launch. It's so, like, you could tell this was made. So let's look. So September 1985, all right? So what was happening in September 1985? The Chicago Bears were destroying the NFL, right? They were on their way to become the Super Bowl champions. So this aired about 4 months before the Challenger actually blew up, which is a very real, very tragic moment. People of my generation, we all remember where we were when the Challenger exploded. So I don't see them doing this episode a year later. So it's weird, especially after seeing that Challenger blow, watching it just be held kind of in the air by these nets while its afterburners are firing and stuff. Like, even as a kid, not to get too serious on this, and obviously it's a cartoon and the guys made it, they weren't going for anything serious, but like, even as a kid, like, you saw that fragility of how fragile the launch could be. And it's so, like, I wonder if this had just debuted, say, 6 months later, would they have debuted it? Like, would they have been sensitive to it? I don't know the answer to that.
Wait for me.
I'm reminded of when that issue of Superman, I think it was an issue of Action Comics, where Kennedy was featured in it, and it hit the stands like a week or the same week that Kennedy got shot in Dallas. We actually just sold one at Golden Apple the other day. I work at Golden Apple Comics out here in LA, and best shop in LA. If you're out here, give it a shot. Yeah, it's a cool little piece of history. So this strangely has a space shuttle connection. 1985 September. There was nothing better than the Chicago Bears. Nothing. Of course, that would lead into the William the Refrigerator Perry becoming a G.I. Joe. Oh, wait, here we go back to the show. So the Joes just saved the space shuttle.
And sushi, what were
And
those?
Cobra Commander and the Crimson Twins just escaped by two gigantic robots who popped up out of the water. And these robots looked like Chemo from the Metal Men, DC Comics Metal Men.
Find Cobra Commander and the Crimson Twins.
Flint sends Snake Eyes and Shipwreck off to chase after these like giant robotic monstrosities. Like, they're really cartoony. It's weird. Like, they're cool though. They're very sci-fi, very cool. And the space shuttle presumably is safely on its way into space. Meanwhile, there's a Cobra Rattler that's flying through the city. Now it's like New York, but they call it, later on they refer to it, actually. They give it a name. It's called like Enterprise City or something like that. And they're flying. It's Destro. Destro's in the Rattler. And Flint and Lady J are flying these Sky Strikers through these towers. Like, it's amazing. It's like a video game. It's great. Like, the animation is really fun. It's very first person. Very fast. They're spinning and twirling and twisting. So they're big robots. How to describe it? So big robots where their bodies are like plastic, and inside the plastic is water, and that's what's given them the bulk of their bodies. And then they've got Metal Gear like harnesses that make up their hands and their heads and their.
Water robots, return to the river and attend to G.I. Joe.
We are going to see the coolest, probably the coolest single like small toy. I mean, we've already seen it, but it's the shark, the SHARC shark. It's the water and air flying machine. Now, whoever designed this at the toy company, whoever thought of this, was freaking brilliant, and they deserve a raise. It looks like a rocket ship, and you can play with it underwater. It can fly, and we'll go to commercial.
G.I. Joe will return after these messages.
Today's File Card Spotlight is on Breaker. Now, he's been with the team since day one. In issue 1, he was the guy popping bubblegum that made it sound like machine gun fire in order to scare the enemy when they ran out of bullets. So inventive. Totally fell in love with him. He came with the backpack that had the connected headgear. So like earliest Joe had this really cool accessory on it that gave him a headphone. It's so great. Now his name is Alvin R. Kibbe. They give his social security number, but I'm not going to file his taxes. His primary military specialty is the infantry. You would think it would be like communications or something. That's weird. His birthplace is Gatlinburg, Tennessee, and they're pretty true to that. He's got that Tennessee accent in the show, which is nice, kind of a Nashville kind of accent. Now he is a grade E4. Now Breaker is familiar with all NATO and Warsaw Pact communication gear as well as most world export devices. Specialized education, signal school, covert electronics, Project Gamma, qualified expert in the M16, M199, blah, 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 guns. Okay, now classified, he speaks 7 languages, which he better. Quote, he's efficient and self-assured, and he has an uncanny ability to turn adverse situations to his favor. Now, he's one of the early Joes, and his file card, those early Joe cards were always a little sparse. He was portrayed in the movie, the G.I. Joe, the first movie. He was the French guy who couldn't go back to France because they destroyed the Eiffel Tower, which I thought was a fun bit. And in the comics, he was used for a good while until he was the victim of like the first mass slaughter of Joes that they ever depicted. There was a big fight in Trucial Abysma, and he was part of like 7 or 8 Joes that got left behind, and they had to find their way out and escape, and it was really exciting. And he ended up biting the bullet, which was a big deal in the comics at the time. Like it really was. He didn't make it out of that excursion alive, and he was one of the originals. So our hats off to you, Breaker. May you find peace in the big pit in the sky. And back to the show.
Now back to G.I. Joe.
So back to the shark. It's an all-purpose toy, and it looks very cool. It looks very sci-fi, and it's super fun. And then in conjunction with the show, it's the all-purpose weapon for them. You couldn't take a Sky Striker underwater. You can't fly that underwater. You couldn't even do like a Skyhawk. What's their motto? On land, sea, and air. So when they introduce sharks to the show, they can just put a guy in a shark and he can go up, he can go down, he can do whatever he wants. So Snake Eyes and Roadblock and Shipwreck are in the sharks underwater fighting these giant robots. Snake Eyes just went down into the silt and crash landed. So did Shipwreck. And they're using kind of periscope to kind of chat with each other, and they're going to skirt along the riverbed to sneak into the Cobra base, which is where they were headed. And that's where Cobra Commander and Tomax and Zaymot hid away. Meanwhile, Roadblock and the other guys are fighting the giant blue sharks, giant blue robots, which, by the way, the sharks also look just like the ship that you fly in the Atari game River Raid, which was my all-time favorite Atari game. So I used to pretend that River Raid was a G.I. Joe game. So you'd be flying, you'd be shooting like Fang helicopters and stuff. It's River Raid. Absolutely should have gotten like a G.I. Joe edition. That would have been amazing. So the robots do a cool thing. They open their face mask and they start sucking in the river. And within that, the sharks get pushed into the robot's body. So they're flying within the robots. Like, this is a really, really cool idea. Like, it's a great concept. Ron Friedman, kudos. That's really cool. They then turn their arm into a water cannon, basically, and they fire the sharks out, with just shoot them out of the water, and they tumble and they crash. Not sure why they couldn't get their bearings again and fly, but either way, it's pretty cool use of those robots. I'm fairly positive those have never been made in any kind of toy. But Cobra Commander and Destro are now talking, and they're telling Destro to come on in and come join them at their headquarters. So this is when you first see that they're going to have this like city-based tower headquarters that Joes are not going to know. It's kind of like it's like a secret lair. So Destro uses the VTOL capability of the Rattler to just fly into the side of a building, and the building opens for him, and then it closes. And by the time Flint and Jay get there, the ship's gone. So this is what it is it's the headquarters for Extensive Enterprise, and Extensive Enterprises is Tomax and Zaymot's business. You visit them, you'll see them all throughout the show. They're very often basing their attacks and stuff from Extensive Enterprises, and there you go. Flint just called it Enterprise City. So that's I don't know how often that's mentioned in the rest of the whole series, but it's kind of cool. So they live near Enterprise City.
Brilliant than usual. The attack on the space shuttle was merely a diversion to mask our true purpose, the secret planting of a special cargo.
So now you see what Cobra's real reason was, and they give a kind of a replay. Apparently, Cobra tapes all of their antics on a special tape. And you see that what they were doing with the space shuttle, they weren't trying to capture it. They were planting a special cargo pod into the bay area of the space shuttle. It's space shuttle. It's 1980s. It's very 80s. But basically, they opened up the top hatch of the space shuttle from outside, of course, and no one noticed it. And they put a couple of cargo pods inside. And guess who's going to be inside? Zartan, as Cobra Commander just says. Zartan's already on board. So the space shuttle, which is red, white, and blue, and this is before they made the Defiant toy. Now, who's piloting the space shuttle? The Desert Trooper, Dusty. And Mutt and our boy Breaker, they're all flying up front. And Breaker, he's our focus of the day. I always liked Breaker on the show. They gave him a beard. They gave him a gray suit, different from the comic book and from the toy. He was always more of a personality, definitely on the TV show. And why Dusty, who is one of my all-time favorite Joes, because he came with that sweet hat, like piece of cloth gear.
Unauthorized cargo? Scarlet here, Mutt. I want you to locate and identify that cargo.
Why he's flying a space shuttle? I don't know. And why they thought they needed to bring a dog into space? I don't know. But you know what? It's one of the awesome things about G.I. Joe. Like, there's some kind of crazy stuff that just happens because why not? Like, it makes sense.
Looks like somebody managed to clip a cargo pod onto the overhead rack.
Mutt realizes that someone put some extra cargo into the overhead rack, and the Breaker uses some kind of Star Trek-y looking scanner thing although it actually could have been like a radiation, what do you call this, Geiger counter. And Zartan is dressed up as the weirdo generic guy that was hanging out with the rest of the team. And they open up, the team opens up the cargo, and Duke's there, and Scarlet's there.
Whatever's in there, come on out.
So they open the cargo, and basically tribbles come out. It's like a Furby mated with a tribble from Star Trek. And that's what you get with these guys. And there is a card that is left behind, which Mutt notices, and so Mutt picks the card up, and he's going to read it for us. And the card says,
"These adorable creatures are called Fatal Fluffies. I'm sure you will enjoy their deadly secret. Sincerely yours, the Cobra
The card,
Commander."
it spells the word there incorrectly. It says IER instead of VIR. Secondly, the card in the animation says, "I'm sure you will enjoy their split personalities." It says it's different from what he reads. So that's kind of funny. And here we go. Zartan blows a whistle, and the Fatal Fluffies, kind of like a Furby from hell, they turn into giant monsters.
G.I. Joe will return after these messages. Now, back to G.I. Joe.
So the Furbies are now 7 feet tall. They have horns sticking out. They're shooting like lasers or blasts out of their face. Oh no, I'm sorry. They have guns. What am I talking out of their face? But they're giant monsters, and they just start attacking the Joes relentlessly. That's what they're doing. There's flamethrowers coming out of their mouth, and part of the pods the Dreadnoks came out of also had the APCs. So the Dreadnoks are driving around on a space shuttle on APCs because, why not have APCs in the space shuttle? Meanwhile, Snake Eyes and Shipwreck have snuck into, through the water reservoir. They've snuck into the Cobra base. And they got to flood the sharks in order to swim up. Polly goes underwater, which he doesn't like.
I'm a parrot, not a duck.
Keep squawking and you'll be a gone goose.
I feel like Polly's a girl. I think we dealt with this before. I think Polly's a girl. I think I like it better if Polly's a girl. But maybe not. I don't know. I don't know if that's it. I will look into it when we do the Shipwreck card. So Snake Eyes and Timber and Polly and Shipwreck,
What is this
they
place?
have infiltrated Cobra, and Snake Eyes just saves him right now from getting creamed by a subway station. It's almost like in Superman the movie,
Sure,
where
who
Lex
noticed
Luthor's
a
lair
wet
was.
sailor with a parrot and a silent masked man with a timber wolf? I think we're in major trouble.
Now, I want to know why he didn't say a silent ninja with a timber wolf. I wonder if they thought people didn't know what ninjas were, because people may not have known what ninjas were, because ninjas were popular then, but they weren't that was the boom of the ninja. Ninjas were never more popular than the early 80s. So I wonder why they didn't say that. So our two guys, they just beat the crap out of some Cobra guards, and they stole their outfits. And so now they're dressed up as Cobra guards, and they're on the subway.
Nobody wants to know a subway philosopher. Now try to relax and act natural.
Says Shipwreck, the man with a parrot on his shoulder. And Snake Eyes' face is still covered up with his visor. By the way, Snake Eyes looks amazing. Let's deal with it.
Cobra Commander, the Crimson Twins, and Destro slipped
Flint
through our
and Jay
fingers.
and
Shipwreck and Snake Eyes are
Rock
missing.
and Roll.
And now we can't make contact
Alpine
with the
has
shuttle
made
or
the show
space
now,
station.
and Bazooka's on the show. Those two are going to be big time Joes for the rest of the series. There's Footloose, Roadblock, Quick Kick, which is funny because they haven't met Quick Kick yet. They literally meet Quick Kick in this miniseries. He's featured in this scene right now. So Zartan calls him from the space station. They take the call, and they realize something's going wrong. And Zartan shoots them with a laser cannon from the space station, and really blows up the pit quite well. The pit is really destroyed, in a really real way.
G.I. Joe headquarters is in ruins. And
I just said that, Cobra Commander. Thank you. But Cobra still has a Cobra Temple, because why wouldn't they?
fools don't know is that the acquisition of Space Station Delta is but the first step in my creation of the
What?
most powerful
The
weapon
first
in
step?
history. The Pyramid of Darkness.
Yeah, there it is. This goes to the big doohickey MacGuffin of this series. So he's got a satellite. It says computer
These
simulation.
control cubes are placed at each of the four corners of the Earth. They will link with the space station to form this pyramid, beneath which no electrical energy source will function.
Now, it's a cool idea. I love the idea because it's kind of neat, and they visualize it for you, so it makes sense. He talks about the four corners of the world. That was always that's a euphemism. I don't know physically what is considered a corner of the world. It seems it's one thing to say, but then to see it in practice, you're kind of okay. So they basically is this. They've got these giant cubes. Now that they've hijacked the satellite, these cubes are going to go to all four corners of the globe, and they're going to link up with the satellite. And if you visualize that, it makes a big triangle, a big pyramid over the top, 2/3 of the planet. The bottom third will be just fine. That's where apparently where Cobra's gonna live. So the Joes vow to fight back. They give a good yo-jo, but they're really messed up right now.
I don't know what those cubes are for, but I'm sure they're not dice for a giant crap game.
Oh, so we know Shipwreck loves craps. I love it. So the Shipwreck and Snake Eyes, the tram drops them off by the cubes, and it's what it appears to be is a giant construction center where they're actually building these cubes. And in order to get through, there's a voice print when there's a big old robot who looks like Raj 2000, like John Burns' Raj 2000 robot. And
Repeat.
Shipwreck just tried the passcode, and nope,
Cobra Commander, the Great Snake rules forever.
no dice.
Intruders! Intruders!
So
Intruders
Raj
must
2000
be exterminated.
calls intruders on them and traps them, and they're going to be exterminated. And that is where we be continued.
G.I. Joe will return after these messages.
In our next episode, Snake Eyes and Shipwreck steal a top-secret laser disc, but Cobra catches them red-handed, and this leads to a hair-raising chase through the treacherous Enterprise City subway system. Meanwhile, aboard Space Station Delta, Mutt creates havoc with gravity as Dusty risks his life to reach the command center, and Flint and Lady J make a fatal attempt to stop Destro from planting the first control cube. All in the next exciting episode of G.I. Joe, the Pyramid of Darkness.
I mean, that looks exciting to me. Everything about that is amazing. It did look like, I forget what it is that Flint and Lady J fell into, but it looked like tomato soup. So there you go. There's the first episode of this new miniseries. Thanks again for listening. I can't wait to get into the next one. We hope you enjoy the show. Remember to tell your friends, share it, and if I make mistakes about what stuff's called, chalk it up to being old, drunk. Thanks for listening. Now you Joe, and Jones half the battle.